from Mark's Gospel, chapter 8, verse 27 through 35. Jesus went on with his disciples. That means to say that they are on the road and they're moving. They're not just starting out, they went on. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others said Elijah, and still others think you're one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "Well, you are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." Thus ends the reading of the word. I'm not taking a chance. I'm going to try to preach this out here, but I had some trouble in the first service, so I'm not going to take a chance. I'm going to preach here. You can all see me, and we'll work this out together, okay? Chapter 8 in Mark's Gospel is the middle of Mark's Gospel. It is the flat middle. And what has happened in this particular chapter is there is a change. Now, Mark's geography is really pretty poor. I have to show you a map. I know you love my maps. This is the map of Israel, okay? And this is the Sea of Galilee, okay? Now, they have just left, according to Mark's Gospel, they've just left Bethsaida. Well, Bethsaida is a town just outside Jerusalem, which is south of the Sea of Galilee, okay? Now it says they're going on their way to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, which is northeast of the Sea of Galilee. So I don't know if they had a 747, I don't know if they had a helicopter, I don't know how they got there, but Mark's geography is just a little messed up, so just kind of go with me on this journey and forget about Bethsaida. We're going to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Now, one of the important things of Caesarea Philippi is it's a Gentile country, and you know who lives there? Herod has this absolutely fabulous, lavish castle up in that neck of the woods. And what Mark did in his gospel is in chapter 6 of his gospel, just 2 chapters before this one, he inserts this story about Herod having decapitated John the Baptist, probably in the castle in Caesarea Philippi. Not only that, in that chapter 6, he also has Herod stewing over who this Jesus is. Who is this Jesus, he asks around. And people ask him, who is this Jesus? And it's said in the gospel that Herod thinks Jesus is John the Baptist raised from the dead, out to haunt him. Now, isn't it interesting that here we are in chapter 8, and Jesus and the disciples, for some reason, are headed into Herod country. Do you think there's a little hint that he's headed up that way to kind of taunt the king? I don't know, maybe. But it's interesting to me that he asks The disciples, that question that Herod was asking, who is that guy Jesus? Well, I think he's John the Baptist, come to haunt me. And here's the question that Jesus asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? And the first answer that comes out of their mouths is what? John the Baptist. And then the second answer that comes out of their mouths, and they're walking along, we're walking here, okay? And they're walking along, and that casual question comes up. He doesn't stop them. It's just a casual question. Who do people say that I am? Oh, they say you're John the Baptist. Oh, they say you're Elijah. Oh, they say you're one of the prophets. He stops them in their tracks when he says, okay, who do you say that I am? Well, Peter leaps on the question. He takes on the mantle of leadership in that moment, and he speaks for all of the disciples, and he says, well, you're the Messiah. Jesus says, don't say anything. Don't talk about that to anyone. Be quiet and never whisper that to another living soul. And he says that sternly. He says, don't talk about it to anybody. Then he proceeds to tell this story that is absolutely alarming to these poor souls who have just been told to keep their mouths shut. He talks about himself. Mark's Jesus talks about himself usually as he calls himself the Son of Man when he refers to himself. And he tells them about how the Son of Man is going to suffer, is going to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. That's going to happen as they move from Caesarea Philippi. They're changing direction. The disciples have been with Jesus from the beginning. They were among the first who were chosen. And we who saw Jesus come out of nowhere, right? We witnessed in Mark's gospel this guy who came out of nowhere, who came to the River Jordan to be baptized by John. John didn't even recognize who he was. And he has this moment after his baptism where the voice of God speaks to him and says, you're my beloved. I'm delighted with you. And he goes out into the wilderness and he has a very interesting experience for 40 days. And then he calls his disciples and they all get on board. They come and they follow him and they have wonderful experiences with him. They're healing. In these first 8 chapters of Mark's gospel, they're watching Jesus heal people. They're watching him cast out demons. They're watching him. They're witnessing his work. They even get an internship. They get sent out by Jesus to do the work themselves, to heal people and to cast out demons. And they come back with their reports and immediately they're witnesses to Jesus feeding 5,000 people, well, men, plus women and children. So you know it's a lot more. And then they're witness to him feeding 4,000, and they're witness to him healing a deaf man, and a blind man, and a leper. They're witnesses to all of these incredible acts of Jesus. And on this day, suddenly, everything changes. He says, we're going in a different direction. From this day onward, they are headed to Jerusalem. And they are headed to Jerusalem where the Son of Man will be rejected, where the Son of Man will be despised, where the Son of Man will be killed. And his disciples are dumbstruck. What? This very interesting story of Peter suddenly taking on that big brother role and taking Jesus by the arm and saying, wait, come, I need to talk to you. Come over here, I need to talk to you. He pulls Jesus away from the other disciples and he said, Jesus, you can't say that. Don't be saying that. That's not what this ministry is about. You're here on earth to be healing people and casting out demons. What is this nonsense? And Jesus he rebukes Peter, publicly embarrasses him in front of the other disciples and says, "Get behind me, Satan!" Oh. But what has happened here? Peter isn't the big brother. Peter isn't Jesus' big brother. Peter is a disciple. Peter is a follower. Jesus is his master. And it's not something you do to tell the master what his destiny is. The horror for the disciples is to decide whether or not they're going to go along with the plan. Was this the plan all along? That you would be despised and you would be rejected by men? Was this the plan? Well, I don't think I signed up for this part. I signed up for the other part, but I don't think I signed up for this part. The disciples suddenly have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to go on with Jesus to Jerusalem or whether they're going to pack up their stuff and go back home. The part of the gospel passage that is so poorly interpreted and so badly misinterpreted by so many is that part where Jesus says, if you're going to be my followers, then take up your cross. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And there are lots of people in this world who carry great burdens on their backs. There are those people who carry the burden of being the parents to a child that is an invalid, or people who carry the burden of being the children of parents who are aging and who are invalids. There are people who carry the burden of having an alcoholic spouse. There are children who carry the burden of parents who are divorcing. Yes, those are the burdens of this world, and they're burdens that every person carries. There are people who carry the burden of chronic illness. There are people who carry the burden of sudden, devastating, terminal illness. Yes, those are burdens of this life, but they are not burdens of the cross. That's where we misinterpret this passage. Jesus understands that everybody bears burdens and carries heavy weights, but his cross is not that burden. His cross is something else entirely. And so when he talks to his disciples and he says, if you're going to follow me, and the crowds, if you're going to follow me, be ready. You've got to be ready to pick up the cross, to deny yourself and pick up my cross and follow me. You have to be willing to make the sacrifice of yourself. This, my friends, is so incredibly hard for even his disciples to fathom, and even more difficult for us to fathom in this day and age. The only person I can perhaps lift up to you who understood what this meant, who really understood in our lifetime what this meant, is Bishop Oscar Romero, who was a man who was ordained, I think in 1942 as a priest. He became the Archbishop in the San Salvadoran Diocese of the Catholic Church. He was an activist, he was a good guy, he really cared about the poor and the campesinos in San Salvador. He understood that they were getting kind of a raw deal from the government, but he wasn't one who spoke up about it. Not until one of his friends was murdered, was assassinated for standing up for the rights of the poor. Bishop Oscar Romero then began in his sermons to speak the names of the people who disappeared, the names of the people who were murdered, the names of the people who were being tortured by the junta government, by the revolutionary government. He began to say their names in every sermon, and then he had discussions in his broadcast after that. Because he took up the cross of those who were being devastated by a government that was cruel. he was assassinated. 35 years ago, on March the 24th, he was assassinated. This year, Pope Francis, on February the 3rd, declared him a martyr, which is a step moving from a servant, a loving servant of God, moving from that servant status to martyr is the second step towards sainthood. Bishop Oscar Romero was a man who understood what it meant suddenly, after he'd been a priest for many, many years, what it meant to take up the cross of Christ and bear the cross of Christ. And for that, he gave up his life. So, my friends, when someone says or talks to you about the cross they bear, the burdens of this world are not the cross that the Christ hands us. The burdens of this world are just part of what it means to live in this world. The cross of Christ is something else entirely. And so, today, his disciples must make a decision. They must decide whether or not they are going to go on. Because now they must commit to something they never imagined they would have to commit to. In the few days that we have remaining of Lent, please take some time to ponder the question about taking up your cross and what that means really in your Christian life. And you don't have to be Bishop Romero, but please don't identify the ordinary burdens of living in this world as the cross that the Christ has handed you, because the cross that the Christ gives you is one of self-denial and sacrifice. And that is where you will find life.